You're listening to episode 713 of a VerySpatial podcast, April 23rd, 2023. Hello and welcome to VerySpatial podcast. I'm Jesse.
I'm Sue.
I'm Barb.
And this is Frank.
And this week we're going to be talking about some EarthDay things because, we're behind a week, so our EarthDay is going to be after EarthDay, but that's okay. It'll work out. But kind of in that vein, and we don't really, do too many remembrances on the podcast. I think we've maybe done 3 or 4 over the 17 years. But since our last podcast, Virginia Norwood, who was with the USGS, U.S. Geological Survey, passed away, and she was one of the architects for a number of sensors, including the multispectral sensor, the MSS sensors, that kind of led the way. The first MSS was on Landsat 1, continued through, I think there was even an MSS on Landsat 5, even though at that point with 4 and 5, we'd kind of really pushed more towards thematic mappers. But of course, those built on the understanding, the capabilities, and just the technology that the MSSs had kind of started with. So, even her work on projects predates that with some of the earlier landers that went to the moon and places like that. So she was really pivotal in Earth observation. And so it's just, wow, she was in her 90s when she passed a couple of weeks ago.
96.
Yeah.
That's a good haul.
It's still, it's good to remember folks who have had that much of an impact on our industry and world.
Absolutely.
Other things that are part of that Earth observation world, apparently Maxar, once again, is in the acquisition area. So, of course, GeoEye was bought by Digital Globe. Digital Globe then was bought by Maxar, and now Maxar is being acquired by Advent. So we've gone from remote sensing company to remote sensing company to kind of remote sensing company with venture capital to just straight up, this is a holdings company with the new one. So, yeah.
It feels like those, remember those books when you were a kid when we talk about the food chain, the bigger thing keeps eating the thing. I think the holdings company is very interesting. Just because I think that you can see how this could be an advantageous portfolio acquisition for any number of organizations, because we can see where it can be just slotted in a lot of different places. So you can see whether I'm wondering if they're positioning a robust portfolio for something much bigger.
I thought it was interesting that there was over 99% approval for this decision. So it shows you that they're all on board with wherever it is they're going in the future.
Or at least on board with the money.
Yeah, a big enough check and you go on board for a whole lot of things. That's...
Well, I think you do something like this when you're dreaming big. And I think they're looking at geospatial technologies and places in the future that require something like this. I don't know what they are, but I think there's a dream attached to it, I hope.
Any other thoughts on the acquisition? The folks at, what was their name? Satellite, I believe, is somehow tied to it. Basically, satellite IoT, however you want to push that together and make it Spanish. That's how you would pronounce it. But they've launched their first 5G satellite and what is intended to be an array of, I believe, 200 or so, 250 nanosats. And the thing is that it's focusing on Internet of Things. And we've talked about IoT, a few things over the years, but we haven't really talked a lot about how many sensors are out there that are taking advantages and the growing number. So we have talked more about nanosats and people putting things up that are single cameras or, a temperature sensor or something like that in space to detect over large areas. But these, of course, are very much ones where we're putting a sensor in a specific place for a specific use case. Sometimes they're attached to moving things, so they'll also have GPS, but not always. And so this technology and a lot of others that are using things like narrowband IoT, which is kind of the focus here, is low power, large area connection capabilities. These devices are, out there just collecting all kinds of massive data sets. And so they keep building into these various areas of big data as we continue to move forward. And it's just exciting to see. So this is kind of a move from ground-based cellular that a lot of these have relied on to getting more of a, broad access satellite. I think they said that it's going to cover an area of 3 times the size of Texas for each of the devices. So having 250 should cover a large portion of the surface of the planet.
Yeah, and of course, after the commissioning period, once everything goes well, then they're looking to get, I think it's something like 4 more up this year, and then 60 next year, with plans to get all 250 up by 2026. That's a pretty aggressive schedule. So I'm sure that fingers are crossed that their 4-week commissioning period for the initial groundbreaker satellite will go well.
Let's talk a second about a second, because it could be a whole topic in its own right, is the Internet of Things. It's a very innocuous term that I think smooths over way too much nuance. I mean, the variety and volume of things, I think, but like Jesse said, some things have this and some things have that. Some of the other thing is just like, I think we talk about the Internet of Things as a whole basket, but to me, this is almost as bad as 20 years ago saying the internet, like it's a monolith or something like that. So I think that it's fascinating to think about a technology that's up there just to service the doodads and no other real reason, instead of falling back on a greater backbone here. Really, it makes sense, but at the same time, it's like, wow, think about the volume and the variety of things that need the internet. It's truly amazing.
What I thought was interesting about this too is that they were talking about they're not just developing the technology, they're also looking to, alongside that, be developing the standards. So there is some thought of what those standards might be along with the technology itself.
Well, I mean, we're only going to see an expansion of this, right? When we briefly talked about it with the Amazon mesh network. Did we talk about that on the podcast?
A long time ago, yeah.
Yeah. So it, kind of a ground-based version of this that as the Internet of Things, which is, as you say, Frank, ubiquitous, all the little doodads out there that many probably don't realize connect to the internet, as that proliferates, the ways to keep it connected, keep everything connected in their massive nexus, right, are going to have to develop along the way. So again, got ground-based, and now this is a way to do it from our satellite technology sort of perspective.
They never show it this being this complicated when you watch sci-fi. Just all sorts of works together.
Next up, some cool visualization news. CalTech has released in partnership with NASA, Esri Technology, some others, but their Murray lab has released a 5.7 terapixel mosaic of Mars, and they're making it available so that you can see it kind of on a 2.5D viewer. So there's, in the show notes, you can see the link to kind of go take a look at it yourself. But it's pretty cool. There's more than 110,000 images taken by NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. It took them 6 years to create the mosaic. And it actually covers over 99% of the surface of Mars between, you can read it, but it's between 88 degrees south and 88 north on the planet. And then there are a few, I noticed there are a few little blank spots here and there, probably where they didn't get images that came out well. But it's amazing. I played around with it. It's really, really the highest resolution that we've got for all of Mars. And also some of the Mars missions, like Opportunity, things like that, they're marked on and there's little bookmarks that you can go and check out their paths and where they've been. And so that's pretty cool too as well. But just amazing to kind of pan and zoom around and kind of see this image of what the surface of the planet Mars looks like. So check it out if you haven't already.
This is just fun. I mean, it's just fun to kind of pan around and look at a completely alien landscape, and it's truly amazing, given how much, back to the science fiction thing Barbara mentioned in the last news item, is how much of this has been part of our collective consciousness in terms of fiction, to have this for reality now that anybody can just play around with. It's really neat.
5-meter resolution. There are places on the Earth that we may not have 5-meter resolution for. I mean, not a lot. Mostly the poles.
In fairness, Mars is smaller, but still.
Well, I also think of everyone that's doing things with the ocean where they keep saying that we know more about places not on Earth than we do about what's going on, in the ocean. And this is a great example.
And finally, this week in the news, the USGIF has announced new scholarships from Amazon Web Services, Leidos, and GDIT. And so if you are a grad student, undergrad student, I think there's still a couple of weeks left. Let me check that real quick. To submit for this year's round of scholarships. So, make sure to check that out. May 31st is the deadline. So actually you have over a month, depending on when you're listening to this. So they had everything from high school to grad student, PhD level scholarships that are out there. And they range, I think, from $1,000 maybe for the high school all the way up to $10,000 for some of the graduate scholarships. It all includes that. But you have, the existing ones like the Stu Shea Endowed Scholarship, Ken Miller Scholarship for Advanced Remote Sensing, Reinventing Geospatial Incorporated Scholarship, which I think is new last year or the year before. Maxar's scholarship was pretty new. That one's focused on diversity and innovation. The Avona, which I think was a little bit new, AWS, which is this year, Leidos this year, GDIT. And then they have, of course, the ones that are their standard ones that aren't specific scholarships that you can be awarded as well. So if you're a high school student who's thinking about doing geospatial in undergrad, apply. If you're an undergrad thinking about doing this or doing it in grad school, either one, apply. If you're a master's or PhD student, and keep in mind that USGIF has a fairly broad definition of what geospatial intelligence is. So really anybody is...
I've yet to hear anybody's research that couldn't qualify. I mean, I'm not saying that it doesn't, but I'm just saying everyone I've ever talked to, I'm just like, I can see where that could possibly qualify. So, I mean, it is very broad.
There's certain, like, if you're looking at math that doesn't have anything to do with, location or physics that gets down below a certain level of detail.
I'm presuming that 98% of the people listening to a geospatial technology podcast, they're okay.
Oh, okay. Yes. Anybody listening to the podcast. Yes.
Yeah. I think it's fair to say you're okay. Yeah.
What's interesting is some of the scholarships this year are focusing on first generation students and students that are planning to attend community college. So populations that normally wouldn't have access to this type of scholarship.
And that's it for
what Frank said. It's that time of year. It is Earth Day, or it was Earth Day yesterday. And because we forgot we were going to a conference in Ohio last weekend, we didn't record. So, this is week 3 as opposed to week 2. And so we would have recorded this probably before.
But really, we've been very consistent on every day's Earth Day. So
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So we're starting early for next year.
There you go.
For the 2024 day.
No time like the present.
So what were your thoughts for this year or next year or any year?
The interesting thing for me this year that's very different, not very different, but noteworthily different, I would say, than past years is I feel like, and it's just maybe optimism on my part, there's a little more momentum, a little more understanding than we've had in the past, broader out there. We've got initiatives in the United States, at least. Now, the world's, I think, fair to say much of the Western world is a bit more advanced in the United States in some of these things. But the infrastructure improvement stuff that we've got going on in this country has reinvigorated the notion of electric cars, for example. That's an area that is very much moving ahead. And I think an exciting implementation of Earth Day questions and realizing some of the dream of that would have started 50 years ago or so, 52, something like that.
Just after you were born, just before I was born, somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those places where I desperately want to start disagreeing with you because of the realities in the United States that is potentially, arguing to roll back a lot of those things. So the debt ceiling debate is, arguing to roll back some of those things. But instead, I'm going to take the positive look and say, we just saw the executive order to create a new Office of Environmental Justice, which not just brings out the importance of Earth Day, but how that has a social, cultural, economic impact on populations, and making sure that those populations that don't have as much equitable access to some of these Earth Day concepts may be able to get that in the future.
Yeah, and we also have a market, I think, that is moving more aggressively towards, again, realizing some of the dreams. And I want to be very cautious towards realizing. I'm not anywhere near there yet, but that more of the market is looking at greener technologies for energy, for example, and saying, okay, we need to start investing in these at some level. We need to give it a little more emphasis and more. Again, the reference to electric cars is another great example of this. They're saying, okay, this is coming and we're going to have to start adjusting for it. So we need to start putting things in place, whether it be manufacturing or whether it be rollout, or whether it be, basic infrastructure like charging networks. And then, okay, how are we going to feed this electricity to the cars and, that sort of thing. So I kind of feel like we're getting a lot more, I don't want to use this analogy, but rubber hits the road, for a lot of this stuff in the marketplace, which I think is a little more encouraging than whatever the politicians are going to do. Because Jesse's right. There's a lot of stupid nuts of things going on that end to kind of drag you down a little bit. But I am more encouraged by the marketplace saying, hey, I think we should push this a little harder.
Yeah, I mean, I have sort of lots of different threads of thoughts, but one thing, like on that note, right, is also over the years just how, in a small way, it's made me happy every day when we happen to travel in the region and see, for example, renewable energy, just seeing it being installed, seeing it out there, without having to think about all of the rhetoric and things that go on, but even, here in a place where maybe there aren't a lot of politicians that talk about, climate change and earth stewardship and all of those things. But yes, you're right. On a practical level, people are saying we need to do some of these things. So I'm always heartened. They're not the best solution, right? The big solar farms, but seeing that as one physical example of, how awareness is seeping in, like you say, rubber meets the road, and things are happening. And continue, to happen in spite of what's discouraging sometimes on a geopolitical level.
So when I think about it, and being someone in sustainability, it gives me a lot of hope. When I see things, when we were talking about Virginia Norwood, and I think about the fact that she was 22 when she developed one of her first sensors looking for Earth observation and wind. And I think that all along within the geospatial community, that age is no barrier to these type of innovations and ideas. And there's just such a meshing of the geospatial community and Earth Day and creating a better Earth. I think that a lot of the people that work in our field, that's what they work towards. And now that we're seeing all these new imagery come out, I know that imagery is what inspired a lot of people to do change when we're talking about the original Earth Day. So I'm trying to imagine that all of this imagery, all these new ways of seeing the world and other worlds, hopefully is inspiring people to think differently about who we are and our place in it. And I won't go into starting the dialogue from a pale blue dot with Carl Sagan, but that's sort of when I think about this, how I feel.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, just over the years of the podcast, right, all of the great things we've gotten to report on in remote sensing imagery, missions, and new technologies, and just across the board. And I just always remain amazed. But we have been in geography in the geospatial world, right? We have been at the forefront of a lot of this, of doing the work for climate research and, understanding the effects of human interactions on the planet, and, to see the results of those and to continue to see the innovations there, just the decades of success with Landsat. Just who would have thought when the first Landsat went up, it would just become such an amazing archive of the change of the Earth, and more things too, right? Of how sensors and our analysis can pick out just amazing things about what's going on the surface of the Earth and below it. So, things like, the JASON mission that measured ocean heights and, all of these types of things. But then saying, look, now we understand how things are changing and we're learning more every day. And so what can we do about it? And being at the forefront of that as well.
One of the things that I find kind of encouraging, going back to the Internet of Things discussion, it's a little frightening when you think about AI and all that sort of stuff like that. But as we become more integrated as a technology base, I kind of feel like some of the automation can take advantage of scale to make micro changes that add up to massive changes potentially. It's a little frightening because you can use micro changes to affect very negative change, and that's some of the debates we're having about things like social media and whatnot. But by the same token, we can use a lot of geo-enabled technologies. UPS is and FedEx and all of them are a prime example of this, of using that technology to figure out, if I make fewer left-hand turns, it cuts down on emissions, it cuts down on fuel use, it cuts down on all these sort of things. The technologies can auto-correct for this a little bit to make, again, that broad theory that if everybody pitches in, we make massive change together. And to make our devices do that a little more efficiently is kind of exciting. At some level, despite, again, the AI-based reservations part of that too.
Well, I would agree, and one note that I'd like to make is that the advantage that we have in being educators, right, being in the education field, is that we can do our best to kind of present some of these, but it's this next generation, those we're teaching, that are going to be implementing a lot of these things and hopefully using technology to solve sustainability issues, to, really look at our changing planet. And when they discover something and how they can apply, or come to me with a question on, hey, can you see this technology being used in, kind of maybe predicting. I know that one of the first examples were students looking at some of the tools that NOAA's Digital Coast initiative had for looking at sea level rise and change, since we're on the coast. That was a big question. But seeing how those tools could actually illustrate something they were interested. So I had students that come from Charleston, which is not too far from here, which is definitely in the throes of dealing with climate change and its actual, visible impacts on their landscapes. And it's just, that's one part of it, when these new technologies come out and you can see the next generation saying, yeah, I can do something with this, and getting that realization for the first time. So as Barb said, you got hope with some other things. I think that's one of the things that gives me a lot of hope with what we can accomplish.
There's a really neat technology that has been, I don't think it's been invented. I think it's been around at some level, but they've got a massive breakthrough that I just read about just a few months ago, maybe just before the new year, of saltwater batteries, which is an amazing example of technological innovation that's going to help dramatically. The big benefit of a saltwater battery, the downside is they're heavy as all get out. I mean, it's not something you could put into something like a car or something. It would just way too much for you to do anything meaningful with it. But they're great in installations. So one of the ways that they talked about them having massive amount of leverage is we don't think about necessarily the ecological impact of bazillions and bazillions of servers in the cloud running 24/7, 365, doing all the things that we like to do and, need to do. So a lot of those are using lithium-based batteries in some form or fashion, or other types of technologies that are getting harder and harder to extract from the earth, more costly. So they're saying, look, if we can make cheap saltwater batteries and a thing that basically you install it and you just never touch it for 10 years or whatever, then that's a pretty cool innovation. And I think that's kind of exciting that's just, a good example of relatively cheap, ecologically friendly innovations, because we're not going to run out of salt water ever.
Can always make it if we need to.
Yeah, there's that too.
Yeah. But I mean, it's one of those things. It's kind of the context, right? Is we have so much energy being generated, and right now a lot of it is still coal and to some extent nuclear, but we have growing levels of, well, especially solar, and solar, of course, is tied to time of day, and we have more and more server users who are touting the fact that they're going green, but it's that time when it's dark. Whenever right now you generate solar, if you don't have a battery to put that into, a lot of it's just going away because of the lifespan of an electron, an electrical system. It doesn't just sit there and keep going around until somebody uses it. It just gets dissipated. And so if we can put those into these long living batteries like Frank is talking about, that helps us with that nighttime. Yes, with geothermal, we don't have to worry about daytime, nighttime. With one, you're waiting for high winds to come through, or you're in a place where you're getting shifts as the sun comes up and the sun goes down. That's when you're getting your most wind. So it's not as even consistent as solar can be. And of course, solar can have its down days whenever you have clouds. But that's just kind of the key, is being able to take this, and even the coal burning and nuclear power plants that are generating more at night to offset the lack of solar during the day, from the day to the night. There's not a lot of people using at night. So we're also generating too much at night a lot of times. So again, all of this that we're over generating in case people need it, if we could have a place to put it, especially in places like California, that's, prone to rolling brownouts because of need where the electrical grid can't supply it all. So there's, so many different levels to that.
Yeah. And it's incredibly exciting to me. And to add on to that is the stuff that I've read about tides and electricity generation based upon that. So basically on the currents, and since that never basically ever stops, you can generate an amazing amount of electricity off of it. And then if you can just put that into saltwater batteries, which are right there, then it's amazing. It's a really fascinating feedback loop if you think about it.
Yeah, I can't remember how long London's been using that for. I mean, it's been for a while, like over a decade at least, that they've been using tidal power thanks to the Thames.
And offshore wind farms, that's an incredibly large percentage of Europe is using offshore wind farms, which basically doesn't suffer as poorly from solar-based wind variation and stuff. Still does, but not as bad. So, all that stuff coming together and people starting to put the pieces together. I mean, that's encouraging and exciting.
And that goes along with something I thought was really exciting, which was recently in the news, the discovery, again, this idea of listening in the geospatial, that they found that using technology, the patterns of tides and waves and currents were reflecting what was known by surfers for a very long time, who had spent decades observing those patterns, but now could say, yes, this is how it works. And now they can work towards actually using that in and how people do things on a greater level. And so just this combination of intent, observation, and technology coming together is pretty powerful.
Community knowledge and qualitative GIS, right? some of those ideas.
We can temper all this with some of the stuff that Jesse mentioned, things going on in politics. We can also temper this with the sheer volume of reports that have come out in the last 3 years in particular. I mean, they've been going on for a long time, but they keep talking about we're on the precipice of, failure, essentially, where there's no way to go back. There's no way to fix this problem. This is, we're almost beyond that curtain of being able to really make a difference. Now, you can certainly argue where that curtain is, but it exists. It's like climate change. It's something that we can measure, we can guesstimate and estimate fairly accurately that it does exist. we won't have it down to the day, but whatever. You're going to have some variation there. But on all that stuff coming out, I think it just lights. I don't want to say lights a fire, but it certainly puts a bit of a heavier impetus for us to move quicker to solve some of these problems. And in many ways, like I said, I'm encouraged by the fact that we are grappling with it, even in places that you wouldn't expect it. In the middle of coal country, I've seen 2 in the wild Rivian trucks, which is an electric truck that is a small kind of, I would say, boutique style trucking company that isn't sold a lot of places, but everywhere I've seen them have been in traditional fossil fuel bearing technology companies dominating the landscape. Yet you have this electric truck, which is it's really exciting that is even taking hold in some of these smaller enclaves. So I have a question. We said for years that this year is going to be the year of location-based services, right? We kept saying it, and it just never seemed to get out of gear.
It happened eventually.
Then eventually it did. Then it did. Okay. So for years now, we've been saying every day is Earth Day, right? Every day should be Earth Day. You should think about every day being Earth Day. And I feel like this year, for the first time, that's not just empty, not I want to say empty, but certainly not rhetoric, that it has the potential for being true within our lifetime, that everybody thinks about this, about the things we're supposed to think about on Earth Day, considers the things we're supposed to consider on Earth Day more broadly every day. I'm just curious, and I ask the 3 of you, how much do you agree with that feeling? Or do you think I'm just being a little naive and optimistic?
I call last.
Okay.
I was going to say, I think there's a juxtaposition that goes on my thinking about this, which is in having so much location-based services, going back to that, and technologies available to a lot more of the population, that it's sort of strange, but it is the open availability of technology, open availability of data that I think is driving the ability for people to have that impact and to think about Earth Day every day. And I think it's, that it's not lost on me that it is something that has, potential for waste and pollution and brownfields creation and all those things we know. But it's also what is, I think, driving our ability to, like I said, even literally see the world as individuals. So I think that we are getting closer to it than we have in the past. And I think it's because it's touchable and it feels doable, and that individuals can have an impact, whereas before it might not have felt that we had that impact.
But you wouldn't say we're not this year.
I think that we might be getting closer to it, because I think that those images of Mars, I don't know if they will generate that feeling of seeing Earth from space, but I'm hoping that they're generating a feeling of we're one person in a huge universe, and that is a call to action, for where we live.
I think that I want to come down on the side of optimism. I think that this year I'm going to be more pessimistic as this being the year. But I applaud your optimism, Frank, in this. I think that there's still a lot of hurdles, but again, I'll go back to the fact that in my day job, right, in my education, I'm very heartened by those students who ask the questions and see the technology that we're teaching them and say, I want to do a project on how, this county can monitor deforestation locally, right, logging, or take a look at water quality and see the data that tells them what toxic releases are going on, and the awareness part of it that really does give me a lot of optimism, as well as things I'm seeing just happening, large scale stuff. So the new technologies being brought to bear on agriculture, and the idea that we have to be better stewards of the land that's producing the food we eat, and all these types of initiatives do make me optimistic. I think it's going to, like location-based services as an example, I think it's going to creep up on us, and it might be just looking over our shoulder and go, I can't pick out any one year that was the threshold for me, but we're we're on the road, right? I can look back and see a lot of progress. So I think that's where I'm at. So I'm optimistic. I'm not sure I'd come out and say that this year will be a year where I'll see a huge change. But I definitely like it to be any of the years.
My response is one of mindfulness, which may be a word that I'm using too much this year. I don't know. I feel, and specifically generational mindfulness, that people of certain generations are now, maybe the word's not inherently, but through education, through media, through conversations that they're having around them, they are mindful of environmental consequences. Whether they choose to use that mindfulness for positive or negative is a separate conversation. We can go back and point, 3 years ago? We live in one of those areas where there were giant diesel trucks parking in Tesla charging stations. These are all people who are now probably Musk followers, but at the time, so I feel that they're very much aware. How people choose to act on that in certain generations is different. But I feel that, because of that statement of generational mindfulness, there are, existing generations still, including my own, who is less mindful of that. So, you have older generations that are less mindful of it. Those of us in Gen X are more mindful of it, but not everybody equally. And then I would say the current generations that are, whether we want to call them millennials or whatever, Gen Y, whatever. And then the new generation that's now in high school and elementary school, I feel they are, actually having those conversations that kind of started. And so we see with the boomers, if we want to call them that, the introduction of things like sustainable development through the 50s into the 60s in geography and anthropology, and people who are going out and working with communities. And so there was that mindfulness within a portion of the population. And it's just each generation has had more contact with that. So that's my take on it, that we're not necessarily at a specific year where we say everybody thinks of Earth Day every day, because there are cultural and political norms around the world. Don't think I'm just saying in the United States, that utilize that mindfulness in positive and negative ways, from my perspective.
All I'll say is two things. Full cards on the table. I've recently started changing my diet, and I'm taking a daily vitamin and drinking lots of water, and I'm feeling a little better about myself and the world. So that has an obvious impact on my overall optimism about the general notion of Earth Day. So be aware of that. Catch me at the wrong mood on the wrong day, and I would have a very different set of answers. But I think that if I can reframe slightly what you said, Jesse, I think it encapsulates the great thing about this, what I think I was getting at, which is I believe that Earth Day, for good or bad, however you do it, has entered the collective consciousness and part of the collective dialogue, so that it continues to happen on more days than just the one day a year. In some ways that manifests itself as some, in my opinion, very ugly things. And in some ways it manifests itself, in my opinion, as very heroic things or very amazing things. But in the mix of that is always going to change. And certainly I agree with you. I think it's evolving. So the younger you are, the more likely that you're going to have a positive connection to that concept, to that dialogue, I believe. With uneven landscape, obviously, what happens in certain areas is going to be, biased in one degree or another degree, in one direction or another. If you live in an oil-bearing region that is basically owes its entire existence to that, then you're going to have issues as that fades away, and that's going to cause tensions, and that's completely understandable dialogue and why that's going to be driven that way. But I do believe that this is entering the collective dialogue more often, and I really am encouraged by that. And I do believe that Sue's got it right, that and you said as well, Jesse, there's not going to be a year. It's not going to say, this is the year. It's going to be, so we'll look back and say, oh yeah, that's basically when it happened.
So the thing that I was thinking that I didn't even say has to do explicitly with actually all of us in our context that we work in. And so the first time I saw a department of geography, for instance, begin to lean into sustainability was, I believe, UNC Greensboro, and that was 5-6 years ago. At my own institution before this year, UNCP, we started a sustainability minor. That was by no means the first sustainability minor somewhere. It's just, we added that on campus in our department. And where I am now at Coastal, we have a major in sustainability. Our own alma mater and Frank's current university is potentially changing the name of the department from Department of Geology and Geography to something to do with what's the title again that they thought about?
I've been out of the loop, but last time I heard was Earth Science and Sustainability or something like that.
Yeah, so something to do with sustainability. So there's a lot more of that. Whereas whenever I was an undergrad, I was in, I think, actually a fairly unique position for the early 90s, where I was in the Department of Anthropology, where there was a minor in sustainable development. And very much that early idea that was coming from the late 60s into the 70s, that kind of idea of sustainable development, I think, was still being the key at that point of, working with other populations to, work to help the populations, but at the same time, by doing that, helping the environment. And so it's a little bit different from the modern idea of sustainability, which is broader. But still, I was lucky to be there, but didn't really see a lot of other schools with those type of specific degree titles or minor titles. Not that there weren't others, but just not as many as there are now.
Yeah, so I'm cautiously optimistic, and I think that this evolution is going to be slow, and but it's also exciting, and it's fun to watch, nerve-biting to watch in some cases. And it is a contentious evolution, but I think it's going to be a necessary one for us to continue. And I think that we should think about that now that we're 350 odd days away from next year's Earth Day. Again, how do we incorporate these dialogues, these conversations, these thought processes into every day being Earth Day?
Random question. 2024, leap year, right?
Yes.
Probably.
365 days.
Really? Interesting. I was off. Yeah, the reason you can remember, folks, for those of you in the United States, it's a leap year if it's a presidential election year.
There you go.
Because they need that extra day to poll, right?
Yeah.
I guess, I don't know. It's just and it used to be, interestingly enough, if you follow the Olympics, it used to be the Olympics year too, but now it's the Summer Olympics. Now they've split up the Summer and Winter Olympics. One of the many fun facts that I know that I don't really need to know.
Because, of course, me saying undergrad in the early 90s didn't age me as enough, right? We got to keep tossing those other things out that happened while we were alive.
I don't know, while you're talking about mindfulness, which, by the way, I think is an excellent term to think about all of this, right? How much things sink in. And I think about how many years that after that initial push where they, showed pictures of the poor creatures getting trapped in the plastic things that went around bottles, how I still cut every single one of those up every time I use one of those, right? But also, I have never missed, and if I think I missed one, I will go back to the trash and make sure. So mindfulness and awareness, right, can be super effective, and it can be the little things. And so I often think about that.
Yeah, it's very true. When Jesse said that, I was like, it's mindfulness on a personal level and mindfulness, again, on a bigger scale. But also, so some of those now come perforated. Just there's little things, those things thinking about.
It is true. I just used one today.
But they never break well.
No, they don't.
You always have to go back just to make sure.
It's an attempt. At least there was an attempt, unlike 10 years ago where it was just, I don't know, something.
See, but I choose to be optimistic because on the negative side, I get that they're probably cheaper to manufacture. So they trained multiple generations of us to do the hard work of just cutting them up. so that they can still manufacture them and not feel bad.
So this is the science fiction. Here's the science fiction pessimist side of me. Ready? So I read an article yesterday, day before. It's not in the news, but apparently scientists, and they've been working on this for a while, but they've made some massive breakthroughs in a plastic-eating bioagent.
Yeah.
And the thinking is that they can dump this on that big plastic island that's floating around the world. That's, I don't know, like many miles wide. It's massive. To deconstruct that, and the science fiction nerd in me goes, that's a bad idea. I read the story. It's a bad idea.
I saw the article, and the video too. Yeah, it's like
what's amazing to me about that the Great Pacific Garbage Patch are the people that are still alive working with it, that were some of the people that found it, and have done their life's work with trying to find solutions. But it wasn't until we saw that imagery that we collectively went, okay, that's a big problem. So again, I always go back to Earth observation as a powerful motivator.
Going back to Frank's, the microplastics discussion under the ice in Antarctica. So a place with very limited access. I mean, eventually currents go everywhere, but still, yeah, I mean, just think about the proliferation of foodstuffs for this that just continues to consume and consume and consume. Eventually just consumes, and eventually it's going to alter, and it's either going to leave our atmosphere and go somewhere else to try to consume plastics, or begin to consume things that aren't plastics.
We've seen this movie.
Yes.
I know. We're in our heads writing it.
Yeah, we're like, we know what this looks like. It's not good.
Yeah.
Well, that goes along with talking about, nothing goes away. So we've tried putting it under the ocean, and I've heard people talking about, why can't we throw trash into the sun? As geographers, there's a reason we have such a good understanding to explain the impact of things.
In fact, we know what that movie looks like, because it's going to be like an Aliens versus Predator, except for it's going to be the plastic eating creatures that have evolved in the AI that's trying to make the Matrix, and then it's not going to be pretty for us.
Or maybe they're going to work together. Maybe they can come together where we cannot.
I'm going to fall back on it's a story, so therefore conflict is more an interesting plot driver.
And also, I think it never goes well for the humans.
Yeah.
So.
Well, no, the humans are already done at that point if the AI is in charge.
And that's how we colonize Alpha Centauri.
So, of course, you should go to events because they're in person now, and I only got a little bit of a cold this time as opposed to, full-blown sick from one. So there you go.
It was nice to be back in the game, though.
So if you want your event to be added to the future podcast, send us an email to podcast@veryspatial.com.
If you'd like to reach us individually, I can be reached at stu@veryspatial.com.
I'm Barb at veryspatial.com.
I'm Frank at veryspatial.com. No longer on Twitter.
So yeah, someday I will go through and edit the page, but I still haven't after months.
I mean, you can follow me because I didn't delete my account, but I don't do anything, and I'm done with
Well, if you don't do anything, then it will delete.
No, if you don't delete it.
Well, that's right. You have to disable it, and then you get 30 days, then it goes away.
Yeah,
Something
but
like
if you just leave it alone, it's just...
Yeah. I have a Mastodon thing, but I don't use it.
Of course, you can find me at Kinda Spatial, except for, of course, at Twitter. And all of our information over at veryspatial.com/contacts.
As always,
we're the folks from Very Spatial.
Thanks for listening.
And we'll see you in a couple weeks.